Simone, we're not paying for an art therapist. It's not a real job. Your brother's law school fund gets the money. It's final. My father said those words at the dinner table. My stepmother Patricia set down her fork, picked up my acceptance letter, uncapped a red pen, and drew one long diagonal line across the word accepted. Then, in careful block letters, she wrote rejected above it. She held the letter across the table toward me, smiled like someone who had already won, and went back to her dinner. I took it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I held the camera over the page and pressed the shutter. The flash fired once, white and sharp. Neither of them looked up. Before we get into this, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. The screen showed the image I had just taken. The red crossed-out word sat stark against the university seal. Below the photo in my notifications was a new message. The subject line read, "Scholarship confirmation deadline, 72 hours remaining." 72 hours. I was 24 years old. My brother David had watched everything from less than 3 feet away. He had not said a single word. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Simone Walker. I worked as an art therapist at the Spark Community Center, running programs for children and adults who had nowhere else to go. I had watched a 14-year-old who had not spoken in 7 months pick up a piece of charcoal and draw a door on a blank page. When I crouched beside her and asked what was on the other side, she said, "Somewhere safe." From that afternoon, I understood exactly what this work was and why it mattered. My father, Richard, had been someone I believed in completely when I was small. He kept my drawings on the refrigerator long past the age when most fathers would have replaced them. He came to every school performance with a camera. He had a quality of attention that made you feel like the most important person in any room. Patricia came into our lives when I was 14. She took control of the household finances within her first year. By the time I was in my early 20s, my father did not form an opinion that affected the household without her first, which meant he did not form an opinion about me without her. I found the notebook 6 weeks before the dinner table night, in the hallway storage cabinet where my father kept his old records. Brown leather cover, worn soft at the corners. Inside were columns of dates and amounts going back 4 years, gambling debts climbing page by page until the final column reached $47,000. On the last page, in handwriting I recognized immediately as Patricia's, was a single note. "Simone's tuition, use for debt. Tell her it's for David." Between the final pages, folded once along the center, was a photograph. In it I was 7 years old, standing on the sidewalk outside my school. My father was kneeling in front of me, his hands on my left shoe, tying the lace. The sunlight came from behind him, warm and even. On the back, in his own handwriting, he had written, "My little artist." So proud. I held it for a moment, folded it along the crease, and put it in my wallet. I left the notebook exactly where I had found it. When I looked up, Patricia was standing at the far end of the hallway. She had seen me holding the notebook. She smiled once, the kind of smile that does not try to be friendly, and walked away, and walked away. 3 years before that dinner, I came home with a letter inviting me to apply for an accelerated master's program. I placed it on the kitchen counter. My father looked at it without picking it up. "Ah!" He glanced at Patricia, who was standing near the stove with her back to us. Then he said, "If you were studying something practical, I'd pay for it." He said it gently, the patient tone of someone explaining an obvious thing. I folded the letter and put it back in my bag. Patricia poured her tea and did not turn around. Then came David's birthday party, 2 years before the dinner table night. 25 people in the backyard. Patricia stood at the center table with a microphone. "David's law school acceptance," she said. "His test scores. What the family has invested." Then she turned toward me. "And Simone is still working on her art at the community center. We each find our way in the end." Soft laughter, polite, spreading through the crowd. I looked at my father. He was cutting something on his plate. He did not look up. His jaw moved. He kept his eyes down. That was his answer. I had been sending him money for nearly 3 years at that point. Always when he asked, always framed as temporary loans. Each transfer documented with a digital receipt on my phone. The total by the dinner table night was $7,200. The memory I returned to most was from 15 months before. I drove over to collect some of my belongings. I came through the side entrance and stopped in the doorway to the kitchen when I heard Patricia's voice carrying from near the counter. She was on the phone. She was saying, "She won't fight it. She's too weak. Just tell her the money's for David and she won't push back." I did not move. I looked up at the Google Nest device on the kitchen shelf. Its small indicator light was pulsing blue in the low afternoon light. I stood there for a moment. Then I walked back out to my car. I told no one what I had heard. But I did not forget the blue light. I had been carrying it, patient and quiet, waiting for the moment it would finally matter. The ignition event, the celebration for David's bar passage, was held at a country club 40 minutes outside the city. High ceilings, dark paneling, the particular ambient warmth of a room full of people who believe they are exactly where they should be. 80 guests. My father's colleagues, Patricia's social connections, extended family I had not seen in over a year. I wore a blue dress I had bought because I wanted to feel like someone who had earned her right to be in that room. My name card was at a table near the back wall. I understood that without being told. Before dinner began, my father appeared at my shoulder and gestured toward the coat room. I followed him. The room was narrow and smelled of cedar, 2 walls of coats in the dark, a single overhead bulb. The doors swung almost closed behind us. He turned to face me and placed his hand on my shoulder. The first time he had touched me in years. It carried none of the warmth I used to associate with that gesture. He said quietly, "Tonight is about David. Don't make it difficult. Nobody here has any interest in the painting." He was smiling while he said it. The patient, composed smile of a man who considers himself very reasonable. He removed his hand and walked back to the main room before I could respond. I sat down at my assigned table. Patricia gave the first toast. She spoke about David's law school scores and the firm offer, warm and fluent. Then she paused and turned toward my corner, and Simone is still following her artistic path. We each find our way in the end. 30 people turned to look at me. Several of them smiled. The polite smile of people who have been invited to share a joke at someone else's expense and have quietly accepted the invitation. I kept both palms flat on the tablecloth and my expression completely still. My father took the microphone from Patricia. He found me across the room and held my gaze for a moment. Then he said into the microphone, in front of 80 people, "It's time to grow up, Simone. Not everything is about your feelings." I pressed both hands against the table. I counted to 4. I did not move. I did not answer. The scholarship deadline is in 72 hours. I had 2 days left to prove I wasn't a failure they said I was. Across the room, near the far window, my grandmother was seated alone at a small table. She had not joined in the toast. She was watching me steadily. When our eyes met, she gave me one slow, deliberate nod. Not sympathy, not encouragement. The nod of someone confirming that a plan is already in motion. I stood and walked through the room toward the side exit and pushed through the doors into the parking lot. The rain hit me immediately, cold and sideways. I stood in it without moving, both hands around my phone, the image of the red-marked letter on the screen. I asked myself whether I was willing to lose every version of this family I had ever hoped for in order to keep every version of myself I actually was. I already knew the answer. I had known it since the kitchen doorway, 15 months ago. I just needed to stand in the cold rain and let it become something I was completely sure of. I sat in the driver's seat with the rain coming down on the roof and the windshield fogging from the inside. My phone screen said 68 hours remaining. I did not start the engine. I sat and watched the water run down the glass in long converging lines that divided and rejoined. I had no clear memory of which path I had taken from the building exit to where I had ended up parked. I opened my wallet. I took out the photograph. I tilted it toward the window, toward the orange glow of the parking lot lamps coming through the rain. My father, kneeling on the pavement, his hands cupped around my small shoe. The light behind him warm and even. I could just read the words on the back if I held it at the right angle. My little artist. So proud. Something fell onto the photograph before I knew I was crying. I rubbed it away with the edge of my sleeve, gently, trying not to smear the ink. I put the photograph back in my wallet. I thought about what he had written on the back of that photograph, and what he had just said into a microphone in front of 80 people. I thought about the notebook and the columns of debt. I thought about the blue light on the kitchen shelf and the voice through the screen door and the $7,200 I had never once asked to have back. I thought about every time I had folded a letter and put it away and chosen the version of the story that kept the peace. And I thought about how much peace I had actually received in return. I started the car. I drove back across the city to my apartment, the same route I had taken 100 times. I parked and went upstairs and opened my laptop. I logged into the shared Google account my father had set up years ago. I navigated to the Nest audio history. I entered the date from 15 months ago. I pressed search. Pics. Building the trap, the file loaded in segments, and for a moment the audio was too fragmented to follow. Then, a cleaner portion came through, and Patricia's voice filled my apartment at 2 in the morning. She won't fight it. She's too weak. Just tell her the money's for David, and she won't push back. A pause. Then my father's voice, quieter than I expected and more tired. Yeah. Do it. I played it again. I played it a third time. On the third listen, something that had been pressing hard against my sternum for 3 years released all at once, and I laughed. A short, clean sound in the quiet of the apartment at 2 in the morning. The specific relief of finally holding in your hands the thing you had been carrying as suspicion for a very long time. The next 48 hours were the most focused I have ever spent. I downloaded the complete audio history from both the kitchen and the living room devices going back 3 months. 3 files were corrupted. I spent 5 hours re-downloading and attempting to sync them before I recovered enough clean audio. When I had what I needed, I saved copies to my laptop, my external drive, and a cloud folder with a separate password. With 36 hours remaining, I called the graduate admissions office directly. The scholarship was still active, the full $120,000, waiting for my written confirmation. The registrar confirmed the amount. She then mentioned that the department chair was traveling and could not complete the acceptance paperwork remotely. She added that the department chair would be attending a professional reception the following evening, a Walker family event she had been invited to as a professional guest. The scholarship deadline is in 72 hours. I had 1 day left. With 24 hours remaining, I sent the department chair an email. I attached the audio files. I attached the photograph of the crossed-out letter. I attached the wire transfer records showing $7,200 sent to my father over 3 years with no repayment. I requested a brief meeting at the reception the following evening. She replied in 10 minutes. I'll be there. Bring the originals. My protection was assembled. The audio logs from 2 separate devices. The confirmed meeting with the department chair. 3 years of transfer receipts. And in my wallet, the photograph from when I was 7. The afternoon before the reception, I drove to the house to collect the last few boxes from their garage. Patricia answered the front door. We stood in the entrance facing each other without speaking. I did not mention the audio files or the email or the scholarship. I looked past her into the kitchen, found the Nest device sitting on its shelf in the late afternoon light, looked back at her face, and smiled. A slow, quiet smile. Nothing hostile. Nothing triumphant. The smile of someone who already knows how the evening ends. Her face moved through several things very quickly. She stepped back from the door. I loaded my boxes and walked to the front gate. My father was coming in from the street. He stopped when he saw me. His mouth opened slightly. I looked at him for one moment, shook my head once, and kept walking. That night at 11, my phone buzzed with a message from David. It said, "Hey, I have something from the living room from last month. Mom offered to buy me a car if I stayed quiet. I don't want the car anymore." There was a file attached. I downloaded it. I listened to the first 30 seconds. I added it to the folder. I arrived at the reception early the following evening. Before the first guest came through the doors, I found the venue's audio technician and made a brief, specific request. He was efficient and professional. The setup took 15 minutes. By the time the room began to fill, I was seated at my table, ready. My grandmother was already at her table near the far window when I came in. She rose when she saw me, moved slowly across the room with her cane, and pressed a small brown envelope into my hand without a word. She held it there for a moment, making sure I had it, then returned to her seat. My father and Patricia were standing together at the bar on the other side of the room. Neither of them had seen her approach me. I found my seat and I waited. The speeches began after the first course. My father stood to raise a glass for David, warm and expansive, the version of himself he produced for rooms where opinions needed managing. I watched him from my seat, and I thought about the photograph in my wallet. The department chair rose during the pause between the second and third speakers. She asked if she might offer a few words about a scholarship her committee had recently had the privilege of awarding. My father turned. He looked at her. He looked at me. I watched the calculation move across his face. He was at the front of the room before she finished her second sentence. He took the microphone and said, loudly enough for every person to hear, "I want to apologize for the disruption. My daughter has been struggling lately, and she has a habit of making family occasions about herself. She is not receiving any scholarship. She doesn't have the qualifications. I'd ask everyone to bear with us." Patricia, in the front row, gave one slow confirming nod. I had my phone in my right hand. I pressed play. Patricia's voice came through the room's own speakers, clean and level. "She won't fight it. She's too weak. Just tell her the money's for David and she won't push back." The pause. Then my father's voice. "Yeah, do it." My father had not moved. His face had gone the color of something from which all warmth has been pulled out. His mouth was open and producing no sound. The microphone in his right hand tilted slowly toward the floor as the hand holding it began to shake. He took one step back. His heel caught the speaker cable. He grabbed the podium with both hands, and the effort of staying upright was visible to every person in that room. Patricia sat in the front row with both hands locked around the armrests of her chair. Her back was rigid. Her eyes were fixed on me. The expression on her face was not anger and not surprise. It was the look of someone watching a structure they spent years building come apart at every joint at once. The department chair opened her folder. The paper made a dry, precise sound as she turned the pages. She adjusted her glasses and read, "The Scholarship Committee has awarded Miss Simone Walker the full amount of $120,000, covering tuition and living expenses for the next 3 years." The air conditioning unit above the far wall continued its low and even hum. Near the entrance, a glass was set down on a table hard enough to ring. I stood up. I walked to the front of the room. I stood in front of the microphone. I looked at my father. I said, "I was never the weak one, Dad." "You were?" His hands were on the podium. His lips were moving. Nothing was coming out. My grandmother was already on her feet. She crossed the room with her cane, and the room stayed quiet while she moved. She stood beside me before she began to speak. Her voice was uneven, but every word came through clearly. I watched this family for 20 years. Patricia, I watched you take what belonged to this child and lie to my son, and I stayed silent because I told myself silence was protection. I was wrong. She opened the small brown envelope. Inside was a savings passbook, handwritten columns of deposits going back more than 2 decades. She placed it in my hands. I started this the week she was born. I added to it every year I could. She is ready. David stood up from the center of the room. He held his phone so I could see the file name on the screen. The same recording he had sent the night before. He had kept it and brought it forward at the moment it mattered most. Across the room, my father was still holding the podium, and Patricia had not moved from her chair. The scholarship was confirmed that week, and I used a portion of the savings my grandmother had held across 24 years to open a dedicated art therapy room inside the Spark Community Center, with my name on a small plaque beside the door and a waiting list that filled before the walls were painted. My father sold the house within 3 months to cover the gambling debts, and Patricia relocated to her mother's home in Florida. David, who had refused the car and delivered the file, now lives in the apartment 2 floors below mine and attends law school on a merit scholarship he earned entirely on his own. This morning, a girl of 8 handed me a drawing she had made with red chalk. A tall figure standing at the front of a room with a crowd of smaller figures below her. Written beside the figure in large, uneven letters were the words, "Miss Simone, I want to grow up like you." I held the red drawing in both hands, and I thought about the red pen and the word that had been crossed out, and I understood that the letter had always belonged to me, and they had only ever borrowed the ink. Most of us have stood somewhere, in a dining room, or a parking lot, or a narrow hallway, holding proof of who we are, while someone who was supposed to love us looked right past it. How do you decide when keeping the peace has finally cost more than peace is worth? If that question finds something in you, this channel was built for exactly the kind of person you are. I am Simone, and I was never the weak one.